They say a mother's love has no limit. Maybe that's true, until the moment your own child turns it into a test. I woke before the alarm that day. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Even the city outside my window seemed half asleep, as if it already knew something I didn't. I moved slowly through the apartment, the same small place I'd kept since Ryan was a boy. I still had the photo of him on the shelf, 5 years old, missing a tooth, holding a paper airplane. I brushed the dust off the frame and smiled. A mother's habit. We smile even when our hearts feel heavier than we admit. I boiled water, poured it over the tea leaves, and let the steam fog the kitchen glass. That tiny cloud almost looked like hope, and I remember thinking, it's going to be an ordinary day. At the firm, people were whispering before I even hung up my coat. The air felt strange, tight, like something bad was waiting behind the polite smiles. My manager called me into his office. He didn't even look me in the eyes at first. He just shuffled papers, cleared his throat, and said words that I'd heard other people fear all my life. "Grace, I'm afraid we have to let you go. The company's restructuring. It's not about your work, you've been wonderful, but the budget." I nodded before he finished. I didn't trust my voice. He offered a handshake, maybe expecting tears or anger, but all I felt was a numb stillness. Years of service, gone in one careful sentence. I packed my things into a small box, 3 pens, a mug Ryan had given me years ago, a faded plant that leaned toward the window. Nobody said goodbye. They looked away instead. Outside, the sun hid behind clouds as if it, too, couldn't watch. By the time I reached the bus stop, it had started to drizzle. Willowdale always looked softer in the rain, like the whole city wore a veil. I carried my bag under a half-broken umbrella and watched water slide across the streets. Each drop sounded like a tick of a clock, counting the seconds until I had to tell my son I'd lost my job. I tried to imagine how Ryan would react. He had a good position now at Brightstone Holdings, a smart wife, a fine apartment. I told myself he'd be kind, that he'd tell me it was all right, that we'd figure things out together. That's what children do for their mothers when life gets cruel, or so I thought. That evening, I was heating soup when the knock came. 3 sharp taps, confident, impatient. Ryan never called first. When I opened the door, he was standing there in his neat gray coat, and beside him was Sophie. Her perfume filled the doorway before her smile did. "Mom," Ryan said, already serious. "We need to talk about something important." The soup was still on the stove, but I turned off the flame and led them inside. Sophie sat without asking, crossing her legs carefully so not a wrinkle touched her dress. Ryan stayed standing, holding a folder against his chest. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't mention my job. Maybe he already knew. He opened the folder and spread the papers on my table. "These are just to make things easier," he said. "You shouldn't have to worry about bills or taxes anymore. We'll handle everything for you." Sophie nodded, still smiling. "It's for your protection, Grace. We just want you safe." I looked at the lines of print, the official stamps. Legal words that spoke a language colder than winter. The paper said transfer of ownership my apartment. "My only real thing in this world. Ryan," I asked softly, "why is my name disappearing from this line?" He sighed, like a man explaining something to a child. "It's just paperwork. It keeps things organized. Sophie and I can manage the finances better than you." Better than me? The words didn't sting yet. They just floated in the air like dust waiting to settle. I could have argued. I could have shouted or asked if love now came with conditions, but I didn't. I saw his eyes, impatient, defensive, and realized nothing I said would reach him tonight. So I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake, though my heart did. The sound of the pen scratching the paper was louder than the rain outside. It felt final, like a door clicking shut. When I finished, I slid the folder back to him. "Don't worry," I said quietly. "Everything finds its balance." Ryan looked relieved. Sophie smiled wider, mistaking silence for approval. They left soon after, promising to call, to visit, to help. Their words hung behind them like smoke that didn't smell like truth. When the door closed, the apartment fell into that strange quiet again. I stood there for a long time, listening to the echo of their voices fade down the hallway. Then I turned toward the window. The city lights blurred behind the rain, and in my reflection, I saw a woman I almost didn't recognize. Tired eyes, steady face, still wearing a faint smile because habit dies last. I touched the glass. It was cold. The first tear didn't come from sadness. It came from realization. I had just signed away my home to the boy I once carried in my arms, to the child who used to cry if I wasn't there, to kiss his scraped knees, and now he had taken the roof above my head with the same calmness he used to ask for a bedtime story. I sat down at the table, where the papers had been, and stared at the empty surface. The soup on the stove had gone cold, but I didn't move to reheat it. Silence has a taste. I learned it's somewhere between metal and regret. Hours passed. The rain turned heavier. I made tea again because that's what I always did when the world felt too large. The kettle hissed, the clock ticked, and every sound felt like company. I thought about calling Ryan, telling him I forgave him already, asking him if he really understood what he'd done. But pride is a strange companion. It keeps you upright when everything else falls. So instead, I whispered to the air, "You've shown me something tonight. Ryan, I won't forget it." The words weren't a curse. They were a promise, soft but sharp enough to carve a new path. Sleep refused to come. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the old curtains, the marks Ryan had left when he was small, tiny pencil lines measuring how tall he was each birthday. I stopped at the last one, the year he'd turned 12. I remembered him laughing, saying, "I'll be taller than you soon, Mom." He was right, but he never realized how fast a child can outgrow not just height, but heart. I packed a small box that night, just some photos, documents, the mug from work, and a sweater that still smelled like the past. Tomorrow, I told myself I'd find a new place. Something small, something quiet. I'd start again. Because what else does a mother do when the world betrays her? She builds another world. Before dawn, the rain stopped. The city began to breathe again, buses starting, birds half asleep on wires. I opened the window. The air smelled of wet pavement and endings. I thought about how people imagine betrayal comes with shouting, slamming doors, tears. But real betrayal is quieter. It arrives with polite voices and clean paperwork. It sits beside you and calls itself love. Later that morning, I wrote Ryan a letter I never planned to send. "Dear Ryan, I hope the world treats you kindly. I hope your success fills the space where your love used to live. One day, when you see a woman walking alone in the rain, remember your mother once did the same. She walked away not because she wanted to, but because you left her no door to return through. Love, always, Mom." I folded it neatly and tucked it into the photo frame beside his childhood picture. Then I placed the frame face down. Not from anger, just peace. By evening, I had 2 suitcases by the door. The apartment looked almost empty without the little pieces of life that made it mine. I took one last look around. The walls held years of laughter, birthdays, and quiet nights. They also held the moment I signed them away. I whispered, "Thank you." They say starting over is brave. I think it's just what you do when there's nothing left to lose. I found a room above a bakery on the quiet side of Willowdale. The stairs creaked. The paint peeled, and every night smelled faintly of bread and sugar. It wasn't home, but it was a roof. I unpacked my 2 suitcases, lined up the photo frames on the narrow shelf, and told myself this would be enough for now. Rent was cheap because the walls were thin. Through them, I heard the baker's radio at dawn, children laughing in the alley, and once, a couple arguing in whispers. Life carried on, indifferent to anyone's heartbreak. The first few weeks blurred together. I woke early, took long walks, and searched for work anywhere that would take me. Most places wanted someone younger. Still, I kept trying. One afternoon, I stopped at a community board outside a library. A small flyer read, "Bookkeeping help needed, short-term work, contact Daniel Rhodes, legal services." The name meant nothing to me then, but I dialed anyway. A calm voice answered, "Rhodes Law Office." I explained I could handle numbers, files, anything quiet and precise. He asked me to come by the next day. His office sat above a flower shop, the kind of place that smelled faintly of paper and lilies. Daniel Rhodes looked to be in his 40s, gray at the temples, gentle eyes behind thin glasses. He shook my hand and gestured for me to sit. "You've done accounting?" he asked. 30 years, I said. That's longer than I've been breathing spreadsheets, he smiled. I laughed for the first time in months. He handed me a small stack of folders. Let's see if you still remember how to balance chaos, I did. Within an hour, the files made sense again. Columns, numbers, quiet logic. He watched me work and said, "You've got patience. Most people rush through the hard parts." "Patience is the only thing I have plenty of," I replied. That day, he hired me part-time. Weeks became months. I kept records, typed letters, and learned the law's small languages. Daniel treated me kindly, but never with pity. He paid me fairly and taught me things I hadn't known. About property deeds, company shares, how the world hides power in fine print. Once he said, "Most people sign their lives away because they're tired." Not stupid. I thought of Ryan, of my signature on that cursed line, and stayed silent. When work ended, I often walked home past Brightstone's glass tower. I would glance at the lobby lights and imagine Ryan somewhere inside. Busy, confident, unaware that his mother was still learning how to stand. One evening, Daniel found me staring at a legal notice about investment trusts. "You interested in this stuff?" he asked. "I'm interested in not being helpless," I said. He nodded slowly. "Then start small." Knowledge first, money later, so I did. I borrowed library books, read articles online, filled notebooks with terms that once frightened me. Each new word felt like armor. The world had taken everything I owned, but it couldn't take what I could still learn. Occasionally, Ryan called. Our conversations were polite but empty. "How are you, Mom?" "Fine, dear. Need anything?" "No, thank you." Sophie's voice sometimes echoed in the background. Laughter too sharp. Questions about dinner reservations. He never asked where I lived. I never offered. Once he mentioned, "Brightstone's got new investors, some trust buying up shares." "Whole thing's changing," I smiled to myself. The world always changes. Some of us simply learn to notice sooner. I kept an old ceramic jar by my bedside table. Every week, I dropped a few notes inside from my pay. The clink became a heartbeat. When the jar filled, I opened a small account under a quiet name, Ravenstone Trust. The name came from the birds I saw each morning outside my window. Black, clever, patient, like me. At first, it was nothing more than a safety net. But Daniel helped me see how small nets, woven long enough, can hold something larger. The bakery downstairs wanted to sell a storage shed behind the shop. It was cheap, half-broken and useless to most. Daniel helped me file the paperwork, and suddenly my name, Ravenstone's name, was on a property deed. It wasn't pride I felt. It was disbelief after losing everything. Owning something again, even a shed, felt like taking a breath after being underwater. I repaired it bit by bit. Cleaned the dust, painted the door. The baker laughed. "Planning to live in there, Grace?" "Planning to start somewhere," I said. One night it rained like it had in that first storm, the night I lost my home. I sat by the window, tea in hand, watching droplets trace paths on the glass. I thought about Ryan and Sophie in their comfortable apartment, probably arguing over small things that didn't matter. Strangely, I didn't feel anger anymore. Only distance, like I'd stepped off a train that still rushed forward without me, and I was standing on a quiet platform watching it fade. Maybe that's what healing looks like. Seeing the same picture from farther away until it stops hurting. A few months later, Daniel mentioned a client retiring and selling a modest apartment block. "You could buy a share of it," he said. "Through Ravenstone, of course," I laughed. "With what money?" "Patience pays interest," he replied. "And you've saved more than you think." He was right. Between my savings and a small loan he helped arrange, I became a minor partner in the property. It wasn't grand, but it was stable income. For the first time, I slept through the night without worrying about rent. Sometimes I drafted letters to Ryan, short notes about my days, the smell of bread downstairs, the sound of rain on the roof. But I never mailed them. He had his life. I had mine now. Still, every time I wrote Dear Ryan, my heart softened for a moment, then the ink dried, and so did the feeling. One Saturday morning, I saw Sophie at the grocery store. She didn't notice me at first. She was too busy arguing with someone on the phone about a dress order. When she turned, our eyes met. "Grace," she said, surprised. I smiled politely. "Sophie." She glanced at my simple coat, at the basket of bread and tea, and I could see the calculation in her eyes, trying to measure how far I'd fallen, but I didn't feel small. I felt invisible, and invisibility can be a gift. We exchanged a few meaningless words about the weather, then parted. As I walked away, I realized she hadn't asked how I was, and I hadn't cared. That winter, Daniel brought a bottle of cider to the office. To new beginnings, he said, we drank from paper cups. He asked if I ever missed my old life. I thought about it for a long moment. I miss who I was in it, I said. Not the life itself. He nodded, understanding too easily. Maybe he'd lost something once, too. Work multiplied. Ravenstone's small investments started to pay off. They say revenge burns the hand that holds it. But what I held wasn't revenge. It was purpose. Ravenstone. The idea came quietly one evening as I sat in Daniel's office, surrounded by papers that smelled faintly of ink and dust. We were reviewing a client file when I asked, almost without thinking, could anyone build something that belongs to no one? Something that hides its owner but moves in plain sight? Daniel looked up, amused. That depends. Why do you ask? Curiosity, I said, but inside, the word Ravenstone was already forming. It reminded me of the birds that circled the rooftops of Willowdale, black, clever, and patient. They never fought over crumbs. They waited until everyone left and then took what remained. That, I thought, was the kind of strength I wanted. Within a week, Daniel had drawn up the papers. Ravenstone Trust was born, just another quiet company name in the endless list that filled the city registry. On paper, it meant nothing. To me, it meant freedom. The first brick, my first purchase, was small, a cafe on the city's edge. Half closed, its sign faded from years of rain. The owner wanted to retire. The numbers barely added up, but I saw potential. When I touched the wall, the brick was rough and cold beneath my fingers. Still, I smiled. This was mine. Not a gift, not a hand-me-down, not stolen by signatures. Mine. I kept the staff, fixed the roof, and changed nothing else. People came back slowly, drawn by the smell of coffee and the feeling that the place somehow belonged to them too. Every week, the profits were tiny, but steady, proof that small steps still move you forward. Daniel stopped by one morning, hands in his pockets pretending to scold me. You know, most people retire after they lose everything, he said. I'm not most people, I replied. He laughed. Most people talk. You act, knights of numbers. My evenings turned into quiet marathons of reading and calculation. The desk in my small room disappeared under reports and ledgers. I learned how markets breathed, how they rose and fell like tides, how patience could turn into profit if you waited long enough. Sometimes the numbers blurred, and I'd close my eyes, remembering the pen scratching across the paper the night I'd signed away my home. That sound had been final once. Now, every new signature I wrote was a correction. Daniel would find me half asleep at my desk and bring coffee. You're overworking, he'd say. I'm rebuilding. I'd answer, and he'd smile because he understood there's a difference. Quiet confidence. Months passed, and something in me changed. I started dressing better, not out of vanity, but because the reflection in the mirror had begun to earn my respect again. I walked taller, spoke slower. The bakery people downstairs started calling me Miss Grace instead of the quiet lady. Money didn't give me that. Knowledge did. There's a kind of peace that comes when you realize you can stand alone. Sometimes I'd pass Ryan's office building on my way to a meeting. I never looked up, never searched the windows. He belonged to another story now. Mine was just beginning to take shape. Two more. Doors Ravenstone's second investment came almost by accident. Daniel mentioned a small apartment complex that a landlord wanted to sell quickly. It's not glamorous, he warned. Neither am I said. We bought it quietly, renovated 2 units, and within months, it began to pay for itself. The third property followed, a cluster of small shops near the train station. Each one was modest, forgettable, invisible among the city's giants, and that was the point. My name stayed hidden behind documents and signatures only Daniel and I understood. No one saw me coming, and no one looked twice when I passed them on the street. Power works best when it doesn't announce itself. A visit from Ryan one afternoon. Ryan called unexpectedly. Mom, I was near Willowdale. Thought I'd stop by. Where are you living now? I hesitated. Just a small place, nothing special. He laughed. You always say that. Maybe you'll let me visit sometime. But he never came, and I never invited him. We both liked the comfort of pretending everything was fine. Later that week, I heard from a mutual acquaintance that he'd been promoted at Brightstone. Sophie had thrown a party. Good for them, I thought. Everyone climbs in their own way. Some use stairs, some step over others. Learning to hide in plain sight, Daniel taught me the art of invisibility, how to file under holding names, how to let a trust own a company that owned another. People look for faces, Grace, he said. Give them names instead. So I did. Ravenstone began appearing quietly on small contracts, maintenance firms, rental listings, even a few charity donations. To the world, it was just another line of ink in a crowded ledger. To me, it was armor, the first whisper of recognition one evening. Daniel mentioned Brightstone Holdings during dinner. They've been unstable lately, he said. Rumors of new investors circling. Something inside me stirred. Can individuals buy in? I asked. He looked at me carefully. Technically, yes. But it's risky. So is trusting people, I said. And I survived that. He sighed but didn't argue. Within a month, Ravenstone owned a quiet handful of Brightstone shares. Nothing large, but enough to earn quarterly reports and access to board minutes. I read every line, searching not for profit but for understanding, knowledge. Again was the true investment. Moments of doubt some nights. I still questioned myself, was I building or hiding? Was this strength or fear dressed as progress? But whenever the doubt grew too loud, I'd remember that cold night, that pen scratching, the silence afterward. Pain fades. Lessons don't. I began to believe that rebuilding wasn't about returning to what was lost. It was about constructing something no one could take again. Daniel's warning, one rainy afternoon. Daniel stopped by with coffee and a frown. You're moving fast. Grace, too fast. I'm careful. Careful isn't the same as safe. He leaned closer. Whatever you're building, make sure it's for you, not against someone else. I smiled faintly. It's for me. That was true, mostly. Still, after he left, his words lingered like fog. Maybe he'd seen the flicker of satisfaction in my eyes when he'd mentioned Brightstone. Maybe he knew what even I refused to name. Small kindness, the cafe. I'd bought became a quiet refuge. I'd stop by once a week, sit near the window, and listen to the hum of conversations. No one recognized me as the owner, and I liked it that way. One afternoon, an elderly woman spilled her tea near my table. I helped her clean it, and she said, "You look like someone who's been through fire and came out polished." I laughed softly. Polished or burned, I'm not sure which. She squeezed my hand. Same thing sometimes. I carried her words home. Maybe all survivors shine a little, even if they don't mean to. The quiet milestone. The day Ravenstone turned up, they say time heals everything. But time doesn't heal, it reveals. The whisper of opportunity, Daniel. Came into the office one morning with a file tucked under his arm and that half smile he used when he was about to tempt me into something. Bold, Brightstone Holdings, he said. Their shares are dropping. A few owners are ready to sell. The name felt like an echo. Brightstone, the company where Ryan worked, where my son built his pride. I looked up from my papers. And you think Ravenstone should buy? I think you should decide if the past still owns you, he said gently. I didn't answer right away. I just opened the folder, ran my fingers over the printed numbers, and thought of Ryan signing my apartment papers without hesitation. Within a week, Ravenstone Trust owned a small, quiet slice of Brightstone Holdings. No one knew. No one asked. On paper, I was just another faceless investor. In reality, I was sitting at the same table as my son, and he didn't even know I was there. The weight of their world inside Brightstone's glass towers. Ryan's world looked perfect from the outside. Shiny floors, clean suits, quick smiles, but Daniel forwarded me the quarterly reports. And between the numbers, I could read the pressure building. Ryan called me once that month. His voice clipped. These new investors are ruthless, he said. They want every expense justified. They've started cutting bonuses. Maybe they're trying to make the company stronger, I offered. He sighed. You wouldn't understand, Mom. Business is brutal. I smiled to myself. I'm learning, I said. He didn't ask how. The hollow home Sophie's calls came less often, but when she did ring, her words carried sharp edges. Ryan's working too much, she complained. He promised me a new car and now says we have to wait, as if waiting ever fixed anything. I listened, said little. It wasn't my place anymore to guide them, but part of me still wished they'd look past the things that glittered. That night, after the call, I sat by my window with a cup of tea. The city lights looked like coins scattered across black velvet. All those lights, all that shine, and still so much darkness between them. Crossing paths a few weeks later, Daniel insisted I attend a shareholders' briefing at Brightstone. Just to observe, he said. You don't have to speak. The building felt colder than I remembered. Air-conditioned pride. I wore a plain gray coat and kept my head down as I walked through the lobby. Ryan passed me at the security gate. He was on the phone, frowning, too busy to notice the woman beside him. For a heartbeat, I thought he might look up. He didn't. I smiled softly. Not out of bitterness, just recognition. Some distances are meant to remain unseen. Inside the meeting room, I listened as executives argued over strategies and profit margins. When they spoke of the investors, I realized they were talking about me. Power doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it sits quietly in the back row. Taking notes. The cracks begin to show. Ryan's messages turned shorter, rushed, can't talk. Mom, meeting. Busy week, later. Everything's fine. But I could tell from the tone that everything wasn't fine. Daniel confirmed it later. Layoffs, internal audits, tension rising between management and the new board. Meanwhile, Ravenstone's reports showed growth. My small cafe, the apartments, the little shops, they all hummed along steadily. I had built something balanced while he fought to keep something crumbling. Sophie's anger one evening. Sophie called in tears that quickly turned to frustration. He works until midnight, she said. We barely talk. And when he does come home, he just stares at numbers like they'll love him back. I almost told her that numbers can't love anyone. That's why people hide behind them. But instead I said, be patient, Sophie. Ambition can be loud. Peace whispers. She didn't understand. She hung up before saying goodbye. Later, I pictured their apartment, harbor view towers, expensive, echoing. I wondered if they ever realized that luxury can't warm a room that's gone cold. A walk in the park. A week later, Daniel suggested we get some air. We met at the park, where autumn had begun to scatter leaves like forgotten letters. He tossed crumbs to the pigeons while I watched children chase each other down the path. They still chase what doesn't last, I murmured. Daniel looked at me. Then let them run, he said. Some lessons only time can teach, I nodded. The wind carried the scent of rain, the same kind that had once fallen on the night I lost my home. But now the sound no longer hurt. It was just weather. A letter I never sent. That night, I wrote another letter to Ryan, just a few lines. Dear Ryan, I hope the noise around you quiets someday, so you can hear what matters. Sometimes we mistake motion for progress. Your mother has learned the difference. I folded it neatly and tucked it away. Same as the others, he didn't need to read it. I only needed to say it, to myself. Daniel's observation. The next morning, Daniel stopped by my office with coffee. You seem lighter, he said. Maybe I finally understand the game. And? I don't need to win it, I said. Just not to lose myself again, he smiled. Then you're already ahead. The balance shifts over the next few months. Brightstone changed shape. The board trimmed waste, tightened policies, increased efficiency, exactly what Ryan used to boast he'd do one day. Now, he was living under those same rules. Every adjustment Ravenstone voted for made the company stronger, and his position harder. I didn't feel joy in that irony, only inevitability. The balance was returning quietly, like water finding level ground. Evening calm that winter. Willowdale's skyline glowed against a pale sky. From my small balcony, I could see the tower where Brightstone stood. It looked beautiful from a distance, like all things that hide their cracks. I sipped my tea and thought about the strange symmetry of life, how losing had taught me to hold, how silence had become my loudest language, how invisibility had turned into presence. For years, I had been a shadow in my own life. Now I was the light that made the shadow possible. And though Ryan and Sophie still chased things that would never last, I no longer felt the need to stop them. Some truths you can't teach with words. Time will do the talking. They say arrogance makes you blind, but the fall always makes you see. Cracks in the facade. The news reached me long before Ryan ever called. Brightstone's profits had stabilized, but management had decided to restructure bonuses. It was the same polite cruelty I'd once faced. Daniel handed me the report and watched my expression. "You knew this would happen," he said. Quietly, I knew balance would come, I replied. At that same hour, miles away, Ryan sat at his kitchen table staring at an email. Bonus canceled. 2 words that tightened his chest. He deleted the message before Sophie could see it. But lies, like cracks, don't stay hidden. A week later, the bills began to pile up on their marble counter. Credit cards, car loans, the rent for Harborview Towers. Sophie noticed the red letters first. "Ryan, these are late." "I'll take care of it," he muttered. "When?" she snapped. "You promised we'd go to Paris this spring." "Not now, Sophie." She crossed her arms. "You've been saying not now for months." He walked away, but the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was pressure. The letter from Crescent Bank one morning. Ryan opened the mailbox and froze. The envelope was thick, stamped with Crescent Bank and Trust. Inside, the notice was short and sharp. Payments overdue, penalties rising, final warning. Sophie's voice climbed higher with every sentence he read aloud. "What does this mean? Are we broke?" "No," he said too quickly. "Just a mix-up." "I'll fix it." "How?" she demanded. "I'll call the bank." He didn't tell her that. Crescent Bank belonged to Ravenstone, that his mother's name sat quietly behind its books. He didn't know it himself. I remember reading the same report that evening. Daniel's signature at the bottom. "Routine collections," he explained. I only nodded. The wheel turns for everyone, I thought. Dinner for 2, words for none. At Harborview, their dinners grew shorter. Sophie scrolled through her phone while Ryan stared at the silent television. Once, she threw a magazine across the table. "I married a man who had plans," she said. "I still have them." "Then maybe invite them to dinner," she shot back. He stood, grabbed his coat, and left before anger turned into regret. Down in the lobby, the doorman greeted him politely. "Rough night, Mr. Whitmore?" Ryan forced a smile. "Something like that." Outside, the city lights looked sharper than usual, each one a reminder of how bright the world could be when you were standing in the dark. The envelope with no mercy. The third blow came quietly. A white envelope slipped under their door, stamped with Harborview Towers management. Sophie picked it up, expecting another maintenance notice. Instead, her voice cracked as she read, "Lease termination, effective 30 days. Signed, Ravenstone Trust." She turned to Ryan, pale. "What does this mean?" He grabbed the paper, read it twice, 3 times. "This has to be a mistake," he muttered. "Who do they think they are?" "Ravenstone Trust," she said, pointing to the bottom. "Who are they?" He didn't know, but fury demanded movement. He slammed the letter onto the counter. "I'll find out." Searching for a name. That night, Ryan sat at his computer long after Sophie had gone to bed. The glow of the screen painted his face in cold blue light. He typed Ravenstone Trust into the search bar. Hundreds of results appeared. Property holdings, investment branches, a long chain of legal articles. One address repeated, Willow Street, Suite 14. He scribbled it down, jaw tight, upstairs. Sophie stirred in her sleep and whispered, "Be polite." "Ryan," as if she could sense the storm building even in dreams. He didn't hear her. By dawn, he was already dressed, the eviction notice folded neatly in his pocket like a weapon. My morning. That same morning, I sat in my small office at Ravenstone. Daniel was reviewing contracts while I arranged fresh flowers, a small ritual that reminded me of peace. "Another busy day?" he said. "They all are," I replied. He paused, looked up. "You seem calm today." Maybe calm is just what happens when the world can't surprise you anymore. Outside, the sky over Willowdale was pale and still. I didn't know yet that my son was on his way to me, but something in the air felt heavy, like the moment before thunder. Ryan's drive, He drove through the city faster than he should have, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The streets blurred. Every traffic light felt like an insult. Ravenstone Trust. The name repeated in his mind. He imagined some faceless owner. Cold, rich, distant. Someone who'd never lost anything they cared about. He had no idea he was describing me. The confrontation waiting to happen by the time he reached Willow Street. His anger had turned into resolve. He parked without checking the meter and climbed the stairs 2 at a time. At the end of the hallway, a frosted glass door read, Ravenstone Trust, private appointments only. He knocked once. Hard. Inside, Daniel glanced up from his desk. Expecting anyone? I shook my head. No. The second knock came louder. Whoever it is, Daniel said. They sound impatient. I'll handle it, I said. I stood, smoothed the front of my coat and opened the door. And there he was, my son. Eyes burning, papers in his hand. They say the truth sets you free. But before it frees you, it destroys the walls you've built to hide behind. The arrival. The knock came again, sharp, restless. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Persistent visitor. I'll see who it is, I said. When I opened the door, Ryan stood there, rain clinging to his coat, fury burning where warmth used to live. He didn't recognize the office behind me, the calm colors, the shelves lined with contracts, but he recognized me. For a second, everything in his face shifted. Anger, confusion, disbelief. Mom? He breathed. What? What are you doing here? This is my office, I said quietly. You must be here about the notice. He blinked hard, as if the words rearranged the ground beneath him. What notice? He asked, even though he already knew. The one from Ravenstone Trust. The waiting room, Daniel excused himself politely, giving us space. Ryan followed me inside, his shoes leaving small wet marks on the polished floor. The receptionist, unaware of the storm in the air, smiled. Can I get you some water, Mr. Whitmore? He shook his head and tapped his foot against the tile. I gestured toward the chairs. Sit, Ryan. It's a long conversation. He hesitated, then dropped into the seat across from my desk, clutching the folded eviction notice. I came here to talk to whoever runs this place, he said. To tell them they made a mistake. No mistake, I said. He frowned. Then why is your name here? Are you working for them? A soft laugh escaped me before I could stop it. In a way, yes. Face to face, the silence stretched between us like glass. He looked around, taking in the gold lettering on the wall. Ravenstone Trust, property and investments. You own this? His voice cracked on the last word. I built it, I corrected gently. For a long time he didn't speak. He simply stared, eyes darting from me to the papers on my desk as if trying to piece together a puzzle he'd never thought existed. Finally he whispered, I don't understand. I know, I said. You never asked to. The calm confrontation, I walked around the desk and sat opposite him, keeping my voice even. Do you remember the night you came to my apartment? The papers you asked me to sign? His eyes dropped. Mom, that was a business, I finished. Yes, that's what you called it. So let's talk business before family. He flinched, the same way I once had when he used that word as armor. I lost everything that night, I continued. But I learned what power hides inside silence. I worked, studied, saved, and started again. Step by step. No shortcuts, no favors. He looked up then, shame creeping into his expression. Through this company, I went on, I bought small properties, then larger ones. One of them was Harbor View Towers. Another was Brightstone Holdings. His lips parted, but no sound came. Yes, Ryan, I said softly. You've been working for me. The breaking point, the color drained from his face. He sank back in the chair, staring at nothing. I didn't know, he whispered. I didn't want you to, I said. Knowledge should arrive when it can teach, not when it can wound. Sophie appeared in the doorway then. She must have followed him up. Her hair was damp, her heels clicking nervously. Ryan? She asked, confused. Why didn't you tell me your mother was here? He looked at her helplessly. Because I didn't know. Her eyes found me. You're Ravenstone? I nodded once. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Oh my God, the truth hurts. No one spoke for a while. Rain tapped against the window, the same rhythm it had the night everything began. Sophie finally broke the silence. We never meant to hurt you. I turned toward her. Intent doesn't erase outcome. Ryan leaned forward, voice cracking. I didn't mean, you meant every word, I said, still calm. You told me I couldn't handle my own life. You said it was better if you took control. You believed that. That's what made it real. He lowered his head into his hands. For the first time, the man who once carried arrogance like armor looked small, like the boy who used to ask if monsters were real. They are, I thought, though I didn't say it aloud. And sometimes we raise them ourselves. The lesson behind the loss, Sophie wiped her eyes. So what happens now? Are you evicting us? I looked at the stack of papers between us. Official, impersonal. I'm giving you 30 days to leave Harborview, I said. The same amount of time you gave me when you took my home. Ryan looked up sharply. Mom, please! I held up a hand. Don't beg, Ryan. This isn't punishment. It's balance. His shoulders slumped. You could ruin me, he whispered. I could, I agreed. But I won't. You'll have time to start again, cleanly this time, Sophie sniffed. You don't even sound angry. I was, I admitted. But anger is heavy. I learned to travel light. Memory of the beginning, I stood and crossed to the window. The rain had slowed, leaving streaks of silver across the glass. When you were little, I said, you'd build towers from blocks, then knock them down just to rebuild them stronger. You said breaking things helped you understand how they worked. I suppose we both kept that habit. Behind me, I heard him swallow hard. You think I deserve this? I think life deserves symmetry. He exhaled, the sound halfway between a sigh and a sob. The mother's heart, I turned back to him. His face was pale, his eyes red. Despite everything, I still saw the child beneath the man, the one who once fell asleep in my arms after thunderstorms. Ryan, I said quietly. I didn't build this company to destroy you. I built it so no one could ever destroy me again. He nodded slowly. I understand now. Do you? I asked. Because understanding means changing. He didn't answer. Maybe he couldn't. Grace's final words, I opened a folder and slid the documents across the table toward him. 30 days, I repeated. And this, I tapped the papers, is proof that everything you do echoes. Some echoes build. Some break. He stared at the folder as if it might bite. I'm sorry, he whispered. I know, I said. But sorry lives in the past. Lessons live forward. Take that instead. My tone wasn't cruel. It was simply final. He tried to stand, but the weight of everything kept him in the chair. I reached for my coat. Daniel will handle the details. Goodbye, Ryan. Walking away, as I stepped into the hallway, Sophie's muffled sobs followed me. Daniel met me near the door, his face calm but his eyes searching. Are you all right? Yes, I said, for the first time in years. We left the office together, the echo of rain still whispering beyond the windows. Downstairs, the street smelled of wet pavement and new beginnings. I breathed in slowly, the air cool against my lungs. Behind those walls, Ryan was facing the truth, not the cruel kind that wounds, but the kind that rebuilds. Reflection. They say peace isn't the absence of noise, it's the mastery of silence. For the first time in years, I could finally hear mine. Weeks had passed since that day in the Ravenstone office. The rain had turned to sunlight, and Willowdale looked softer, calmer, like a city finally breathing again. Daniel and I stood in front of a small brick building on Elm Row. The paint was fresh. The sign above the door simple, the Whitmore Foundation for women finding their second start. Inside, the air smelled of new beginnings, fresh paper, brewed coffee, and quiet hope. The space wasn't grand, but it was full of light. 2 desks, a row of donated computers, and a bulletin board already pinned with names of women looking for work. Each name carried a story. Job lost, home gone, family fractured. Stories that once sounded painfully close to mine. Daniel adjusted his tie, pretending not to smile. You've turned pain into purpose again, Grace. I laughed softly. Purpose was always there. It just needed the right address. We walked through the room, greeting volunteers, answering questions. One woman approached me, holding her child's hand. Miss Whitmore, thank you. I didn't think anyone cared anymore. I shook my head. People care. They just forget to show it sometimes. She nodded, eyes glistening. and I realized how familiar that look was, the quiet relief of being seen. Each day after that had a rhythm. Morning tea, the sound of typewriters, laughter in the hallways. We arranged workshops for single mothers, classes for job training, even small grants for women starting businesses of their own. Sometimes Daniel would catch me staring out the window, smiling at nothing. "What's on your mind?" He'd ask, "How small things grow?" I'd reply. He'd nod knowingly. Ravenstone built walls. The foundation builds doors. I liked that thought. For so long, my life had been about rebuilding what was broken. Now, it was about making sure others didn't have to start from nothing. Ryan hadn't called since that day, but I heard from him indirectly. Daniel mentioned that Brightstone was steady again, its new leadership thriving. Sophie had left her corporate job and begun volunteering part-time at a local shelter. One afternoon, a letter arrived with no return address, just my name, written in careful handwriting I would have recognized anywhere. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said. You were right. I mistook control for care, pride for love. I'm trying to change that now. Thank you for teaching me without punishing me. If you'll let me, I'd like to visit one day. Love, Ryan." I read it twice, then placed it in the drawer beside my tea tin. No tears this time, just quiet understanding. Some relationships aren't repaired with words. They mend in time, like broken glass melting back into shape under new heat. A few days later, I was leaving the office when I saw him across the street. Ryan. No expensive suit, no polished shoes, just jeans and a plain jacket. He didn't cross over, and I didn't call out. We simply nodded at each other, a silent truce passing between us like a whisper in the wind. In that single glance, I saw what years had taught him: humility, awareness, and maybe even peace. I turned and walked the other way, smiling. Sometimes, that's enough to know the lesson took root. That evening, I returned to my new apartment. It was smaller than the one I'd lost, but it faced the sunset, gold light spilling across the walls like a benediction. I made tea, opened the window, and listened to the city hum below. Children's laughter, car horns, someone playing a soft tune on a guitar. It all sounded alive again. I sat by the window, pen in hand, and wrote a note for the foundation's opening brochure. They took my home to find comfort. I lost mine to find peace. Silence. Built me stronger than words ever. I set the pen down and breathed in the evening air. It smelled like rain and jasmine and everything that felt like closure. "Daniel," called from the doorway. "Heading out?" "Yes," I said. "You?" he smiled. "I'll lock up. You go enjoy that view you've earned." "Earned," I repeated. "That's a good word." He waved and left. The click of the door behind him sounded final but kind. I leaned back in my chair, watching the city lights flicker awake one by one. Every window, every streetlight, every small glow felt like a heartbeat, life continuing, undisturbed, unafraid. People think closure comes with revenge, with big moments of triumph. But it doesn't. It comes quietly, in soft breaths and gentle mornings, in the peace of knowing you did not become what hurt you. I wasn't the woman who'd been betrayed anymore. I was the woman who learned, rebuilt and forgave, because forgiveness, I realized, wasn't for them, it was for me. The world had taken my comfort. I had built something deeper, contentment. As the sun disappeared behind the buildings, I whispered a small prayer, not for myself, but for Ryan, for Sophie, for everyone still learning the language of loss and renewal. May they find what doesn't fade, I said softly. The kettle clicked. Tea ready again. I poured it, sat by the window, and let the first stars appear in the sky. No tears, no regrets, just quiet, the kind that means you've finally come home. Life has a strange way of teaching us what truly matters. We chase success, love, approval, only to realize that peace was never lost. It was only waiting for us to be still enough to feel it. I learned that silence is not emptiness, it's strength. That forgiveness is not weakness, it's freedom. And sometimes, the people who break us only open the door to the person we were meant to become. This isn't a story of revenge, it's a story of balance. My name is Grace Whitmore, and I finally found mine. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful tales like this. Every story here reminds us, even in silence, strength grows. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and keep listening to the quiet.